we're ready.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope everyone's okay. My name is Sophia. I'm the founder and executive director of Muslim Sisters Staten Island. And we are excited today to have a beautiful panelist here to talk about domestic violence in our community. Joining us from Malika, we'll have Asiya Ibrahim. And from Pillars of Peace, we have Kareem Ahmed and Sadia from Asiya Women's Center. And joining us also with us is our Missy team. We have Josie, Janice, and also Isa. And Brother Hamza will be opening up the program with a dua.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا
Thank you, Brother Hamza, for joining us. And I guess we have Josie and Janice can take it over from here.
Okay, so assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to everyone joining us today for Healing Together, Addressing Domestic Violence with Faith and Strength. My name is Janice, and I'm with Muslim Sisters of Staten Island, also known as Missy. Our organization supports women, families, and the broader community through education, advocacy, and culturally informed programs. We strive to create safe spaces for discussion, resource sharing, and collective healing. So we're honored to partner with We Are Malika, Asiya Women's Center, Sadia Sadso, and Pillars of Peace for today's event. Each organization brings expertise, compassion, and dedication to addressing domestic violence in our communities. So thank you. I'll now hand it over to Josie to introduce the program schedule and get us started.
Barakallahu Feek. Thank you, Brother Hamza, for just grounding us with that beautiful reminder. Once again, I also just want to welcome you to our webinar, Healing Together, Addressing Domestic Violence with Faith and Strength. We are deeply grateful that you've joined us for this important community dialogue. Okay, together our purpose is to, one, we want to provide a safe and accessible space to talk about domestic violence in our communities. Two, we want to share culturally competent, survivor-centered approaches to healing and support. And finally, our aim is to break the stigma, encouraging collective responsibility and compassion in prevention efforts. Before you begin, I'd like to just kind of go through how things will go today, okay? We'll begin with a short activity, exploring common myths and facts about domestic violence. Then we'll move into a panel discussion with two remarkable community partners. And we'll also share resources highlighting and reflections on bystander intervention, and end with a final takeaway and a closing dua. So with that, we can move forward. Thank you. Okay. Myth or fact? The state of domestic violence. Okay. So we'll start now by reflecting on a few statements related to domestic violence. And I'll invite you, as you're watching, to think privately, do I believe this is a myth, or do I believe that this is a fact? This short exercise helps us challenge assumptions and see how misinformation can prevent survivors from getting the help that they need. Domestic abuse always involves physical violence. Is this a myth or is this a fact? This is a myth. It's a myth. Domestic abuse can be defined as an incident or pattern of incidents of controlling, coercive, threatening, degrading, and violent behavior, including sexual violence by a partner, ex-partner, or family member. These incidents can include coercive control, psychological and or emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse, harassment, stalking, and or online or digital abuse. Myth or fact? Domestic violence is only perpetrated by men towards their romantic partners. Myth or fact? Again, this is also a myth. Domestic violence can be perpetrated by either gender and can be perpetrated in romantic relationships, among siblings, by parents against children, and by adult children against their elderly parents. Myth or fact? Children are not affected by domestic violence in their parents' relationship as long as it is not directed towards them. Myth or fact? This is also a myth. Witnessing violence as a child is associated with reports of depression, low self-esteem, aggressive or antisocial behavior, anxiety, and other trauma-related symptoms. Youth who witness DV, domestic violence, are more likely to attempt suicide, abuse substances, run away from home, and exhibit either dysfunctional or harmful behaviors. Myth or fact? Domestic abuse is a private family matter and not a social or economic issue. Myth or fact? Myth. Domestic violence costs the U.S. economy an estimated $3.5 billion annually in job absenteeism and another $100 million annually in medical expenses. Okay. So I hope that, that was beneficial and helped to just increase our knowledge and dispel any assumptions that we may have or preconceived notions as it relates to sexual or non-sexual, physical, emotional, mental, financial, all the different forms of domestic violence that were mentioned here. Okay, so thank you for reflecting on these. So with that, we'll transition to our panel discussion. Today, we're honored to have incredible advocates with us. We have Sadia from ASEA's Women's Center. We have Brother Kareem from Pillars of Peace. Thank you both for joining us to share your experience and wisdom. Let's begin with introductions. Could each of you please briefly share who you are and the mission of your organization?
Sure. I'm Sadia. I'm representing the ASEA Women's Center. ASEA is the first domestic violence center accommodating towards Muslim women. We serve BIPOC, Arab, and South Asian women predominantly. We've been doing this for over 7 years. We actually just celebrated our birthday this past week. And in these 7 years, we have served over 5,000 women and children, going through their stories and helping them rebuild their lives.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Kareem Ahmed. I'm a co-founder and board member for Secretary of Pillars of Peace. We're also a domestic violence agency serving the Muslim community. We have a emergency domestic violence shelter based in Bronx, New York, and we also have non-residential services, case management at Brooklyn County Justice Center. We have a variety of other educational and also grant writing services. I'm really looking forward to this panel.
Thank you both.
Okay, thank you for your participation. Thank you for the work that you do. It's truly appreciated. And you both are definitely an asset to your communities. With that, I'd like to ask you some questions just to kind of guide the direction of this, very impactful and important conversation that we're having today. So we'll start off with this basic one, and I'd like for you both to answer if that's okay. What are some common misconceptions that you've personally encountered about domestic violence in the Muslim community specifically?
I can start. And I think the one big common misconception is that domestic violence is somehow allowed in Islam because you're preserving your marriage, or and that should be the priority. And I think in truth, Islam really emphasizes justice and mercy and the protection of one's well-being, and not the endurance of harm. And it's really sad. I can't explain to you how many survivors have called our hotline and have said, listen, I understand this is wrong and this is not what I want to experience, but I want to save my marriage and I want to be here because I think Islamically this is what I should be doing. So can you connect me to like a Muslim leader that can maybe just talk me through this, and like what are the best practices that I can do better as a wife because they take it themselves as their responsibility. And so they're made to believe that, divorce is forbidden even in cases of abuse. And that just couldn't be further than Islamic practices.
I would agree. That's the one common one we see. I think another common one is a misconception that people have about their own experiences, and towards the point that you had earlier with the myth section, that being able to recognize different types of domestic violence that don't necessarily appear as bumps and bruises, but other types of controlling behavior, and the kind of full spectrum of domestic violence, and how that can be embodied.
Piggybacking off what Kareem said, it's like the emotional abuse, the financial abuse, those things can come out, and people don't realize that it is actually abusive, or that there are tendencies that can lead to physical abuse. It's not the start all be all. And it's very sad for women to go and experience these things.
Yeah. Thank you so much for highlighting that. And what I'm also hearing a lot is when we think about the stages of change, and maybe you can speak to this, the pre-contemplation stage is when you don't even know that there's a problem. You don't even know that you're in a situation. And if you don't know, that it's not necessarily this desire or this urge to act on it. Can you maybe just speak a little bit to that? Or if not, we can just move on. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take a turn going first. If you don't mind saying, I would say it's been really. I would say that I didn't enter this field with a lot of experience in DV. I first started volunteering and starting with as an organization. My professional background's in architecture, and so I joined because there was an effort to build like a shelter, and I was like, oh, I can my professional skills work with that, so I signed it. So I've been learning a lot about this, and I have a lot of surprises because I don't have a background in social work or anything like this, or any kind of social services, and so when I come in, I'm like, it's very interesting. Like sometimes, to answer your question, I would say that you get both sides of it. So you get some people who are convinced that they aren't in trouble, or they don't take their own issues as seriously as we would take them, and some people, they might. I don't want to say overeating, because sometimes it's hard to tell when something is transitioning into something, but knowing how far along you are on the spectrum or in stages of domestic violence is some people perceive more or less, and sometimes it's very certain things that you might think are very clear, like, oh, this is a really serious situation. People are like, yeah, no, this is kind of normal. And some things that you're like, I mean, this is kind of like, someone's being rude, but maybe not abusive, and that they think it's abusive, and you're like, that's just kind of someone had a bad day and they, they spoke. Certain things, it's really hard to gauge, and of course, you don't have the same lived experience as the person who you're speaking with. So if they felt gaslit from, microaggressions or something like that, then they might have a different history of how they take that. But then on the other end, like someone who's getting like hit regularly, like really black and white type things, and they're like, oh no, this is fine. You're like, no, like you should really talk to a caseworker. You should really. I'm not saying you have to flee. You have to leave your home immediately, and there's a lot of considerations that you have to do before you seek shelter. But let's have you talk to a case manager, and it's always a weird, not always, but I'm surprised at how often talking someone off the ledge or telling them to take their case, their situation more seriously. It's a very interesting spectrum.
Thank you so much for that, Brother Kareem. So the next question that we have is, what are some unique barriers that Muslim survivors face when seeking care and safety?
Would you like to take that one, Sophia, or can I?
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
go right ahead. I think the biggest thing that I've noticed is the lack, at least in public shelters, especially, is like the lack of halal food, prayer spaces, or even hijabs, and having like accessible environments. And traditional shelters can often make it feel unwelcoming or not really safe. There's a lot of language barriers, cultural stigma, and the fear of like Islamophobia from the mainstream service providers, and then they further isolate our survivors and discourage them from seeking help. So it's twofold. It is the one logistical aspect of things, but then there is the second aspect of the emotional stigma and things that come from that. So I think a lot of survivors fear feeling like misunderstood or being judged for their faith or even their immigration status, and they fear that by speaking out, they're losing support or even custody of their children if they have. So I think that's something like the ASEA Center has worked really hard is like helping to, and Pillars of Police, the work they're doing is amazing. We kind of go hand in hand in, filling that critical gap of offering survivors culturally competent and faith-sensitive care.
Yeah, I would add one thing to Sadia is
Yeah.
that to his points. I agree with all of that, and check off the work you do as well. I would add language as something that, like, I'm just going to advocate for it. Like, we need more Muslim, social workers, case workers who speak languages from the countries they represent. I remember at one point I was told this. I didn't go to every family justice center, but I was told that we had the only Bangla-speaking caseworker at one point. I think at least for like 6 months or something. And everybody was was sent to go speak to her, and she was telling me wild stuff. She was like, "Yeah, I had one client who has been trying to get through her immigration, and she had been mistreated by her spouse, and to take care of her immigration." The attorney didn't understand what she was saying, and our caseworker just translated for her. And an immigration case that had been going on for like 6 months or something, it resulted in like a few weeks. And she's like, "Wow, I just made a change in this person's life because I spoke Bangla and English." And it was like, okay, like pretty good. I've been told that from Family Justice Center, like there's some languages that are prevalent within the Muslim community, like there just aren't that many caseworkers in all 5 boroughs where like someone actually speaks that language. And so, because of a lot of like privacy and legal issues around language, and around sharing the information, translational skills are incredibly valuable. And so, having that as a resource, I think that encourage your children to do this and to invest some time in, because it's going to make a disproportionate impact, especially when they have access to a lot of languages that are less commonly spoken.
I think that this really speaks to just the enormous impact that you're doing, at ASEA's Women's Center at Pillars for Peace, what you're doing is actually filling a void, right? And I can imagine how isolating it might feel. No, who's going to understand me? How am I going to eat? Do they have halal food? Are they going to judge me? Do they understand my culture? So I think this really speaks again to just the incredible work that you both are doing in the community. Thank you so much for that. Now, I'd just like to ask, how does faith and culture intersect with domestic violence work, the work that your organizations, both do?
Okay. This is a really good question. I personally, I do think that this answer can really vary from person to person, depending on your own beliefs and to what extent you come into the centers or your sort of belief system. I think for ASEA in particular, we try to work very closely with faith leaders so that our survivors have council members that they can talk to and ensure that like their faith is a source of healing and strength and not a barrier. I do want to say something I do see a lot is that culture and family expectations often reject certain ideas. So, even when a woman comes in, there's a statistic data has shown us that a woman will try to leave 18 times before she actually leaves. So that means she left on the 19th attempt to get there. And so family culture will tell you, oh no, you shouldn't do that. These are things that we should stay away from, and can make them feel trapped. So I think that when they see that there are faith leaders encouraging them and telling them like, you need to stand up for what's right for you and giving them options. I think mentally when you feel like you have no options, that defeats growth. So what we need to do is change that narrative, and by showing them that they have a way of getting justice, safety, and compassion, and choosing to leave an abuser is an act of courage, not defiance.
I would add to that, we try to do a lot of educational programming, and what we find is that, and we have a few programs this month, and if anyone, a lot of them are on online too, as recordings. But I would say that doing educational programming where the people who are talking to members of our community about domestic violence are from our community. Sounds kind of basic, but like we don't necessarily have a lot of those people. Like when people first encounter these topics, it might be at a college orientation where they're worried about these sort of things, so they talk about it on campus. But it's very unlikely going to be someone from our community who's speaking there. It might be someone who, depending on geographically where college is or where your high school is, where you first might be exposed to this, very unlikely that it's going to be someone from the community. And so having people who give those talks, when we invite, even if it's a mental health, specialist or mental health professional who isn't necessarily a religious figure, but they're familiar with Islam. Maybe they were raised Muslim, really, and so sort of by osmosis, like there's a certain context to that that I think is really important when we teach members of our community about these topics.
You really brought some really strong points, centered around cultural competency. And because we're Muslims, we have deen, but then we also have our culture, but I need you to meet me where I'm at. So I really think you guys highlight some really good points, and especially when we think about training the healers, right? So they're equipped to deal, to handle the challenges that we face, specifically as Muslims living in America. Thank you so much for that. The next question is, what resources and strategies have you both found to be most effective, especially for those unsure of where to begin? Where do I start?
Kareem, why don't you start with this question?
That's a hard one. I would say it's very okay. It sounds like a very simple thing, but it's a very heavy thing of just listening.
Yeah.
I would say you're going to hear a lot. Like, I don't know, we hear a lot of painful things. I'm not the most client facing person in our organization. I'm probably one of the least client facing people in our organization, but I still have some interactions, and that's just because I do more administrative things in general. But you speak to survivors, and it's just heavy. It's just heavy, and you have to listen and give people their space and their time. And oftentimes, the solution isn't hard, but being ready to hear it or even talk about it is the hard part. And it's sometimes it takes a long time, or at least it took me a long time, I would say, to begin to get comfortable with being uncomfortable around people who've experienced like pretty severe trauma. And it takes a while. Like, it's not something that, if you haven't been trained in this, like, you just walk into the organization, like, I'm gonna like talk. It's like those first couple interactions, it's heavy, and you just have to take time to listen, give it each person you're trying to help this time and space that they need. And then, to be honest, like, it helps to take a break from it too, because it's heavy for your own heart and your own soul to hear that and to listen to that. And when people are frustrated, clients might say things that they're not trying to take it out on you, but they've gone through a lot. And I would say a lot of the times you have to find it in your heart to empathize with that, and maybe take 5 minutes, like, get some fresh air, go look at some trees, and then come back to it, because it's very draining. So I don't know. It doesn't sound very complicated. It's not like a very technical solution, but I would say just to maintain your pace, maintain, like, in Islamic context, your sabr, like, to keep that sabr like humming. You have to also, as a care provider, you have to take care of yourself.
So after providing a safe space, I feel like, just for them to be able to speak about their experiences, that's what
100%. Yeah. It's just easier said than done. That's all. It's like, it sounds like, oh yeah, just like, like, have an office, or like have some office hours and like talk. It's like, no, like, it's heavy. It's heavy work.
The patience within yourself to be able to that are
I think I agree. I think that what the biggest things that we can do is take care of our social workers, our caseworkers, and making sure that everyone that's involved in this kind of work is having some sort of self-care like ritual, if you will, because it is really heavy. And in that same vein, it's really heavy for the survivor and for the things that they're going to. And 9 out of 10 times that you're probably their 5th or 6th call, because I think, again, like, where does it start? It starts with a call. It starts with I'm reaching out to a hotline. I'm reaching out, and whether it's the National Domestic Violence Survivor Hotline, our hotline, Safe Horizons hotline, there's so many different calls I'm sure that they made prior. And I think it starts with mental preparation for that you need to really know that you have to say everything. You have to, and that's something women will call, and when they realize they have to verbally explain everything, they're like, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. And they'll just hang up. And it makes me so sad. I think it's one of the hardest parts of the job, turning women away when you're at capacity, or when they're just like so defeated, because they're like, I've already done this so many times, and I have to now tell you again, because you might help me or you might not. And So I think it starts with mental preparation, that it's not a one and done. You need to be prepared that you're going to be asked a lot of questions, but it's solely because if we don't have the context of the answers, we cannot help you to the best of our ability. Like if it can, if it's emergency housing, if it's case management, like legal services, if you're a citizen, things like this come into play, your insurance, like things like that, we need to take everything into account so we can set you up for success. And but obviously, when you're in your abuse, it's hard to see that there is light at the end of the tunnel. But uh, like Kareem said, it's really holding their hand and walking them through the tunnel. That like truly, that's what we're here to do. As far as resources and things that are effective, that maybe they aren't, and strategies maybe that people don't know about. Obviously, with this new administration, funding has been cut immensely, but there are things like housing vouchers and like public shelters that can help them get their own space. And I think I've seen a lot of survivors walk away feeling so empowered when they get their first apartment or something of that sort. And they're like, it's the little wins, but it's also the big wins of like, I get to decorate this entire space myself, and he doesn't get to dictate the color or whatever I'm using or the bed frame. And she feels safe to just be her own person.
And empowered.
Exactly. Absolutely. Uh,
Yeah, that really, I think it really speaking to just it's a journey, right? And the first step is might be making that call, but just to kind of double back, I want to go back because it's really stuck out, Brother Kareem, is you talked about the weight, both of you, right? The weight and how heavy it is. Sometimes it's just a call, just we're just gonna listen to them and be kind. But no, there's something actually called secondary trauma. So once you two have had like calls upon calls and hearing of these experiences, empathy, that takes effort, right? That's also something that takes effort, active listening. So what I'm really hearing is just the importance of that, not necessarily saying here's a resource and help, let me know if I'm understanding this right, but it seems like the first step on your end for both of you is just really forming a relationship. Am I understanding that right? Or am I?
yeah, I think there you need to build some sort of rapport and really offering a safe space, like, hey, we need 15, 20 minutes to talk. Is this a safe place? Like, are you okay? Can we get you somewhere safe if you're not able to talk right now? When is a safe time to call you? Um, r- I've even seen survivors, they're like, I cannot call because he took my phone. And so what she did was, and she was afraid of him emailing her. So she wrote in white ink so that this way, when you looked at the email, you couldn't see it unless you highlighted it, and then you could see it. And so we did the same thing back to her. We just asked all the questions, performed the intake through email, but made it seem like it was a normal email so that, God forbid, her abuser went through her emails and saw that, he would have no clue. So it's really adjusting to them and what they need.
Amazing. Amazing to think about that. That was genius.
Yeah. I think that's a great tool,
So our next question is, how can we as a community, right now I'm speaking specifically to the Muslim community, how can we better support those who are currently enduring domestic violence, whatever that may look like for them?
I can start. Believe them. Listen without judgment. Avoid telling them what to do, and instead of reminding them, instead, like, remind them that they have options, that they deserve safety. And support can really even just look like offering a ride or accompanying them to an appointment, or just simply checking in consistently, like, hey, what's going on? How are you? Um, and when they tell you about their abuse and they open up about these things, make it a judgment-free zone. Because even though we're talking about, secondary trauma and things of that nature, The best healing can only start when you accept what's going on and are ready to move away from those situations. So really just giving them that space so that it maybe if like the first or second time they're thinking about leaving, when they vocalize that to somebody, perhaps it won't take them 19 times to leave because somebody believed them. Somebody gave them the courage and was like supportive and empowered them to, let's get you in the right direction. Let's get you feeling safe.
Yeah, and I think that the believing has so many facets beyond that, where if you really do believe someone, then you're more likely to. Let me rewind. If you there's sometimes you see reluctance on bystanders' parts of believing because they can't necessarily understand the value of believing without some secondary action that follows it. And oftentimes you don't necessarily need any secondary action. And also you're not dictating what that secondary action is. So sometimes you would have people who might say like, oh, well, if I acknowledge or I accept what that person is telling me about the family situation, I'm going to be a homewrecker or I'm going to be breaking up families. It's like actually like if you accept it and you listen to it, then we can have like so many different types of like better interventions, whether it's educational, whether it's like you can introduce a faith leader, you can introduce counseling, you can introduce all different types of options. But if you just kind of hide it under the rug and shove it under the bed, then it's only going to get worse. And so believing something and addressing it sooner than later, besides the immediate validation that the survivor is relaying to you, you have so many. It's a step in the. It's always going to be a step in the right direction. It's never going to be regressive.
I just wanted to. I think sometimes when the abuse is not so visible, right, when it's emotional abuse, and let's say you're speaking to a friend, and there's probably been many cases where like you're like, okay, I'm leaving this time, and then your friend is there and they're listening, and then again, I'm leaving this time, but it doesn't happen, right? Because you can get stuck in that cycle very easily when it's emotional abuse, because again, it's not physical. So I feel like maybe it's important to, I know that friend that's hearing, I'm going to leave often, can then eventually be like, okay, I can't do this anymore. Like you keep going back, And I feel like maybe that what Kareem had mentioned about and Sadia about no judgment, right? Just sticking it out with your friend until that 19th time, maybe, just being there for that person that is struggling and doesn't understand how to move forward and where to start and leave that relationship that's not very healthy, and just being there, as much and as many times as, you can be. And I know, again, it's heavy on that person, the second person, right, that friend, just like seeing this happen also, right, seeing this happen to their friend and seeing that it's not moving forward in the ways that she would want that it's for her friend, but like maybe not just giving up on that friend, and it will make a whole lot of a difference.
Great point, Janice. Great point, because those scars, they are invisible. There are no physical signs of financial abuse necessarily. There are no physical signs of emotional abuse. This person took my passport and won't give it back to me. This person took over my bank account. I don't have access to my money. So these are not physical signs, but they're very, very real. If you don't mind, Brother Kareem, I kind of just want to challenge you a little bit, because I know we've kind of been speaking today. It feels like I want to be really holistic while I have everybody here today. So I want to ask you the same question, but I want to rephrase it as a community. How can we support brothers, males, who may be going through domestic violence?
Oh, Brother Kareem, we can't hear you.
Sure. No, sorry for that. I would double down on my previous answer actually, and say it's much harder for a lot of brothers to talk about this and to conceptualize this. Towards the answer I was saying earlier to I think the second question about I mentioned like some people who minimize what's happened to them because they normalized it in themselves. I would say for a lot of brothers, especially, I'll just say like I come from an Egyptian background. It is not uncommon, like where my father is from, where like fathers hit their sons, and it's just like, yeah, no, my dad beat me the other day. It's like, yeah, like no, haram. And so it's like it's like they don't understand that to be like and like a pattern that's not acceptable within our tradition. And so there's a lot of self-minimizing, like minimizing on men's own selves because of how much it's normalized within a lot of households. And so to be able to listen to that and also let people come to terms with their own experiences on their own terms and not to insist that someone was it's difficult to talk about because it's a very fine line between making someone projecting onto someone and letting them come to terms with their own experiences. And that's a very tricky thing to go between because you don't want them to repeat those patterns. So you don't want to you don't want to continue to normalize it, but then you also don't want to project anything onto them. You just want that to kind of stop. If they're not ready to talk about it in terms of I'm a survivor, they're not ready to put that label on themselves. I personally don't want to insist on putting that label on someone unless they're ready to say that about themselves. I find that, in my experience at least, and this is not scientific or like statistics or any published study, just my experience, like I know a lot more. I know lots of brothers who have told me verbatim they've been as children, but don't identify as survivors. But I've had like since starting to do this work, like I've had sisters just like people in the community are like, oh, Kareem, like, are you the Kareem, same Kareem started closing, yeah. And they're like, oh, I'm a survivor. I had a sister who told me like maybe 3 months after we started Pillars, she's like, oh, I'm a survivor. And I was like, whoa, like, and she I think that was the same night that I met the sister. Like I was at a lecture, and then after the lecture, like some mutual friends were all talking, and she's like, "Oh, you're the Kareem, so I'm a survivor." I don't think that would ever happen with any brothers that I know. And the only brother who's ever told me that was a friend who I've known for 10 years, who's lived with me for 3 years. One of my old roommates. He told me after I started doing this work, and and so he told me that after like knowing me for 10 years. And so I think that the openness to discuss that is not as present with a lot of men. And I think that means that like when someone is finally ready to open up to you, like you have to be really receptive. You have to be really ready to listen, and you also have to be really careful about projecting anything on them. Because it probably took them a lot more to get to that point to really say that. Sorry, I just spoke for a long time.
No.
Sister Sadia, is there anything that you'd like to add just in terms of advice if we happen to be in a situation where a brother, does kind of openly say, hey, I need help, just in terms of how it would be best to, serve them at that time?
Yeah. I think this question is very important. I just personally, for me, I have 3 older brothers, and like God forbid that any of them said anything like this to me, like it would really hurt my heart. And I think there is a big stigma, especially now in our society, for men to be a certain way and for men to not be vulnerable. And because they don't have spaces where they can openly say what's going on, that's their first barrier. So for someone to even just find a way. Sometimes men are easily brushed off when they experience, you know, we can take it a step further. Domestic violence and sexual assault go very much hand in hand sometimes. And when men share their stories about assault, most of the time, the stigma is, oh, why would you say that, or why would you feel that way? And they're kind of, just swept under the rug. And so I think as a community, we need to be able to accept that men are human and that they experience things like this, and they can and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate for everybody. And giving them that safe space needs to be step one.
Yes, emotions and feelings are normal for any human, right? Not just for women. So it's important to be able to kind of create spaces where we speak about these things, and we allow for men to feel comfortable to come forward with these things and not feel like, oh my God, I'm less of a man because I'm speaking up, So it's important for us to provide spaces that they'll feel like I'm heard, I'm seen, just like, we do for women. So definitely, it's extremely important to do that.
Thank you. So powerful. What kinds of preventative measures should be implemented to protect families and promote healthy relationships? And like we say, we're not just talking about romantic relationships, right? It could be, parent-child, teacher-student, but just in general. Please, you can just elaborate on that.
Yeah. Prevention starts with education. If we don't give the kids resources and access to understand and build their emotional intelligence, I really think from a young age, we should be building children's emotional intelligence, letting them understand, yes, there is a, right and wrong. There can be a clear outcome, but I don't think it's that simple. Like we're talking about, like emotional abuse, financial abuse, these other things that they might think are nuances, or this generation is like, oh, just being petty, and it's fun and games, but it's not. So I think it can really start, in the educational system, making sure that we're talking about these things. I think in the Islamic community, sometimes DV is seen as taboo. And so maybe having even khutbahs that openly address DV and understanding, like, yes, right from wrong, but also what Islam says about this, and how as a man, how should a man be, and one as a woman, how should you be? What are your options, and roles and responsibilities as husband, as wife, as Muslims in the world. So yeah, for different relationships, it can look differently, but I definitely think it needs to start from, the schooling, maybe premarital counseling, but it really needs to start with education as the basis.
Yeah, I would add to that, to what I said about the education, in that DV education is really hard, because a lot of the times you have a banner or a talk that's called, like, let's talk about DV, like no one will come. And so we have another board member, and she's she worked in social services for quite some time. She worked for other agencies before joining this board with us, and she said that, like, some of these agencies would host a talk, and they'd be like, rooms, coffee, donuts, whatever, and like 3 people would show up, because like no one wants to get off work and hear like really like harsh things, like similar to like what our caseworkers listen to. And so we always try to frame our educational programming, like Sadia said, like in what is a healthy relationship. It's like let's focus on what a healthy relationship looks like. If it doesn't look like this, maybe ask yourself some questions or talk to someone. But like, this is what a healthy relationship is. These are good ways Like these are examples from within Sunnah Hadith that we have for like what a healthy relationship looks like. This is what the Quran says about healthy relationships. These are the obligations that we have towards each other, different members of the family, different members of our community, and framing it as in like, let's really talk, like to this point, like not necessarily like even going so far as to talk about DBA explicitly, but like how many clips do you hear about like healthy family relationships? Like you hear a lot about like what's halal and what's haram, but like what is akhlaq and what is like what are adab and akhlaq? Like we hear a lot less khutbahs about adab and akhlaq, and we hear a lot about like halal and haram. And I think that like asking your local masjid to like talk about adab and akhlaq like within a family, and like what are the obligations, not just that children have to their parents, but that parents have to their children, because we all have rights over each other, and framing that in terms of what is healthy. I don't know. You can't see the angle. I have like more gray hairs inside of this, and so I've not heard like the term petty being used for like abusive behavior before. I was kind of like, when she said that, I was like, what? But I think that like it's never too soon to start having those conversations, and to start framing that in terms of what that really looks like in our communities and in our homes.
I want to add, like, framework is so important, especially with this generation. What I've found, something that we've been implementing at the ASIA Center is taking the things that are like current events and finding ways to address DV in them. So, for example, Love Island, there's very like examples of toxic relationships, and so we'll make posts about that to show the educational and informative way. Like, hey, this is not the most healthy thing, but this is what's being showcased into media, and these are the things that our kids are consuming. And we need, again, I really truly do think it starts from a very young age. You just never, like Kareem said, never too early to be educated about these things. Or even with the Diddy's case, and we've been following that, everybody has. And so making sure that we're aware of like, hey, these little things led up to these big things, and we can take preventative measures that way.
So I'd like to add one thing in terms of educating our communities. I think teaching proper coping skills, because a lot of times we don't know how to deal with either disappointment or, anything that don't go your way, so to speak, and teaching people how to deal with anger, because anger management is a thing, right? Sometimes culturally, like we said before, for the men, sometimes it's like, oh, you have to be a certain way or else you're not considered a man, right? When I've seen so many caring brothers with their wives, if they're unhappy with something, they speak to them with respect, right? Instead of being harsh. And so I think teaching how to deal in relationships altogether, I think is an important thing that we have to do as a community. Different types of coping skills, because sometimes we are upset, but we don't know how to channel those anger. And so the people closest to us is the one that gets the brunt of it. You're not just with our spouses, but with our children as well, right? So I think these are the things that should be emphasized in different communities, in all our communities actually, and how to deal with stress. Because a lot of times it's like, oh, zik or read Quran, but if your mind's not there, you can't get to that point. And if you don't have the skills to make it work, you're not going to be able to focus on what you need to have done.
That is a very powerful point. I think that with everything that was said, one thing that to summarize, I think it is important to have that education in the masjids, not only having the khutbah, like Brother Kareem said, about certain things, but just about, just getting into the root of the problem and trying to figure things out on how to manage your emotions, or just understanding what domestic violence looks like so that you can see it for what it is. And just having these things not only in the schools, but in the masjids, because, all the brothers come to pray and the sisters get together and the kids come together too. So just having that education in the masjid, I think it'll be a powerful thing as well.
Yeah, Sister Sadia, I think you really, led us with, that powerful statement that you made, which was prevention starts with education. I think that was such a powerful statement. And thank you so much. And also, I'm trying to listen to what everybody's saying, but sometimes we do, speaking to what Sister Janice was saying, that there's this separation that sometimes maybe subconsciously some of us may make between deen and mental health, as if the two don't meet. Right. But when we look at, the experience, the life of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and we think about, the time of Hazan, when he was ran out of Mecca, mental health, depression and sadness, we've been feeling things for years. So how do we merge the two? And just, I remember there was a time there was no, no AFCIA Women's Center, no Pillars of Peace. We really didn't have resources that we could reach out to, to kind of feel comfortable, just to kind of, okay, I'm ready to at least acknowledge it. I don't know what it's going to look like when I walk through this store, but I know that they look like me, they understand me, and they're here to help me. So, and also another thing, this is a really good point, was Sister Sally, with the current events, sometimes there can be like this age gap, between like the younger generation and the older generation. So this activity with the current events, with the Diddy trial, and how can we pull out, how can we connect this to DV? How can we create posts that advocate? So with this beautiful term, prevention starts with education. I was wondering, can you just both share a little bit about what your organization, some initiatives that they've done, just to kind of push that knowledge into the community as a form of prevention?
Yeah, so we actually have quite a few different programs that I feel like the emphasis really starts with education. One of them being the Rahma program off the top of my head. It is I've actually never seen this in the entire United States. It's a program designed specifically for pregnancy and postpartum care. Emphasis on postpartum care because I think that our healthcare system really is like, okay, you gave birth, Kalas, go away now, you know? And I don't think that's fair at all. And I don't think that therapy or other resources are given to these women. And so, things we did do were like support groups and making sure that women knew, like, hey, there are other women that are going through similar experiences as you. Another thing would probably be our community engagement. We really do try to have volunteer events, and each volunteer event will have like a portion dedicated to talking about what's happening in the world. And essentially, when that topic comes up, usually a lot of stories come out as well. And it'll be very organic, and we can talk about, have our own little healing session essentially of what's going on, and really address like, oh, I saw this yesterday and Huda was doing this on Love Island, and I thought that was kind of cool, and she's really funny. And there's someone else that will turn around, but did you think that was the best way for somebody to handle that situation? And it'll turn serious, but in a good way, because then those will adjust the framework of, again, like the younger generation. It's for some reason there's this stigma of it's cool to be emotionally unavailable and to treat people a certain way, and that affects people's mental health. And so just organically having conversations that challenge our quota nowadays and the way that our brain naturally will adjust to things. So those are really big programs, I would say, that are trying to find ways to making ensure that we're bettering the education.
Yeah, I would agree that like different types of icebreakers like that, like it's hard to walk into an event and talk about EV, and so any type of icebreaker you can get to like get people talking, people will often I don't know, in my experience, people will often share once you can get them in conversation with each other. So I would say that strategy is always a strong one. The other thing I would say is, like, whenever we have events, we always encourage people, like, hey, if you or anyone you know is in, could use help, or you think they might need help, please share our information. And whenever we have like more intense periods of outreach, like the Awareness Month, we do a lot of work during Ramadan. Very often we'll get emails not from someone asking for help, but for someone asking for help for their friend.
Yeah.
That's very common. If someone's like, oh, my cousin or something, like, or my cousin's friend had this issue and she doesn't really feel comfortable, but like, and they'll start trying to just like make that connection and kind of like hit them with the next steps are, and they're trying to like help somebody else out. And so just being open to, it's not really a conventional situation the way that you would get in more of an institutional way of like at the Family Justice Center. It's like you either call in yourself or you walk in. But when we're within community, there's these other ways that like we're in community, so community helps, and they try to cross those bridges and close those gaps. Just kind of trying to do the right thing.
Okay. And finally, what does healing look like for survivors? And what hope can we offer to those individuals that are still in difficult situations?
That's a good question. I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is that healing is not linear. It's never going to be just a straight line, from pain to peace. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's a process filled with small but powerful victories, and that can often go unseen. I think a big win that I see in my survivors is realizing what's happening to them isn't love, and it wasn't done out of love. And the second part of the question, for those struggling to visualize it in their current situation. I'm Kareem. I'm gonna think on that one, but Kareem, if there's
Yeah,
something you'd like to add.
I'll give two examples, and I'll add to what Sadia said about it's not necessarily always linear, but it's also not necessarily it's rarely the same for two people. Like especially the small victories along the way, and two small victories. We have some partnerships with like other organizations, and one of the organizations that we do partnerships with, they do arts training and collaborative arts projects, and so like essentially art therapy. And I went to I through my professional work is how I knew the artist who does that, and so she found out that I did this, and she's like, oh, like, if there's anyone staying at your shelter who would like to do this, like I do this with people, and so okay, sure, and I offered it. I didn't know if anyone would take us up, and someone did, and then actually at the opening for this art show, I met her, and this art show was like making mostly like women's fashion out of recycled materials. So there was like purses and scarves and this kind of thing. And so I spoke with her there, and she's like, yeah, this is really, really great. I love this, and I love this person. And that was like a small success that, being able to like find a non-familial, more welcoming space. I think that someone enters shelter, it's like, okay, that's like, it's not necessarily, first of all, it's not a final destination. Like that's a break point to get out of something really bad. It's not your final destination by any point, but to be able to rebuild community is really important, because if someone is leaving a APP situation, like, to put it very very directly, if you are in a domestic violence situation, like you're in that with your family. Like it's the closest community you can have. So, and a lot of the we talked about like kind of the spectrum of DV things, like not necessarily hitting someone, but being controlling. Oftentimes, one of the most common things you see is cutting that person off, sometimes even from their own, their own parents and their own family that way. So you're only part of the spouse's family, and that is the family that's abusing you. And so when you leave that, depending on how hard it is to reconnect with maybe your family, your parents and brothers and sisters, that part of your family, and they might even be more supportive of your spouse, depending on what cultural expectations are. Like you might be really, really alone. Like it's really hard to explain how cut off someone could be if they were very isolated and then they escape, but now they don't really know anybody, or they don't know anybody in that same way that like the people on this panel might have. Like, you all might have, inshallah, hopefully, alhamdulillah, inshallah, I don't want to make any assumptions, but I hope everyone here like has very healthy relationships with their family and friends and a network of community and people. I would be left for anything less than that. But you have to imagine that if you don't have any of that, then you're really alone. And so any connection or any like healthy relationship you form after that point, it looks like a small victory to someone else. It's like, oh, like, you volunteer at this, arts project and, you had a little opening, and it's like, oh, okay, like that's great. But like for that person, it might have been really meaningful depending on, how many other healthy relationships they have in their life. It's like, if you have 25 healthy relationships in your life and alhamdulillah, everything's going great for you, that's great. If you have 0 healthy relationships, getting one more healthy relationship is infinitely more healthy relationships than someone going from 25 healthy relationships to 23, 26 healthy relationships. It's like a really big jump for that person. And so that's an example, I think, of what what something like stepping in the right direction starts to look like. But it's very hard for someone who has a life full of healthy relationships to see, to understand like how game changing that can be. And it's also, you can't ask that client of like when they enter shelter, you're like, oh, so how many healthy relationships do you have in your life? Like you can't ask that type of question. So you don't know how big of a deal any one good thing they have going for them is. That's another, challenge in doing the work, obviously, but it's also something that like puts a lot of things in perspective when it's like, oh, this is small. It's like, actually, no, this is huge.
I agree. I feel like everyone's experience in healing is going to look different. And it's that finding that support system when you don't have it and you feel alone is a big victory for people who don't have the support. And I think that when you have a chance to do that, you get to a point where you start to feel like, okay, I'm no longer just surviving. I have a chance to breathe. And now I can feel like I can start to be myself more. And that's also part of that healing, like that turning point of like, oh my God, I'm no longer in danger. Getting to that point is super important for someone who's gone through such, depending on the abuse, right, and everything they've experienced. So I think that that's part of also understanding the healing process and what it looks like for yourself. And everyone is going to experience that very differently because nobody's gone through the same experiences that, the other person has. So.
Thank you all for this wonderful discussion. It was truly enlightening. I hope that through this, we have kind of helped take away some of the stigma and kind of set the tone that it's okay to talk about this stuff, right? It's okay. So it's just also just a reminder that, that healing and prevention, it's collective. It's collective effort. And for us specifically, grounded in faith, grounded in justice, grounded in, compassion, and all those positive things. So thank you so much for this just really powerful discussion. At this point in time, we'll transition over to our resource spotlight. The resources, I believe, will also appear on the screen that you've prepared. There we go. I don't know if you wanted me to read them or if you wanted to go through them. Sister Sadia, were these yours?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about it. I wanted to first add the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Like I think that's something we all should have access to and know about, that there are doesn't matter if you're based in New York or not, there's a place to start. About the ASEA hotline is there, and just a little bit about our programming and things that we're able to help with. So emergency shelter, case management, so legal, employment, clothing, case management can look very different depending on the client. Programs, I did talk a little bit about the Rahma program and the essentially helping, after birth and postpartum, the housing justice, which goes into our shelter, and mental health services. We have mental health workshops every other Monday. So each conversation is very different. We actually just had a conversation this past Monday about integrational trauma and how to break the generational curses and things that are going on family to family. We have our advocacy and civic engagement, so joining coalition groups and really getting in front of politicians and saying, hey, let's do more for our survivors. Community engagement, so that can look very different from events. We actually just had our one of our biggest events. It's called Miles for Migrants just yesterday at Astoria Park. We raised over $10,000 for our immigrant and refugee program, which was amazing. We're supporting families from Sudan, Yemen, Palestine, and those being targeted by ICE and helping them rebuild their lives in New York City. I talked a lot about ASEA, but I'm also the founder of Sadia Said So, and essentially what I do at Sadia Said So is to help Muslim women rebuild their lives in the employment aspect. So something that I'm able to do is work with you from step A of just building out your resume to step C, finding you a placement and connecting you with other Muslim organizations to work with you and get you to a place that you will find stability and find your own peace. And like we talked a lot about financial abuse, so something that I like to do is financial literacy workshops. I think as Muslim women, or just in women in general, sometimes we are exposed to environments where we're like, you know what, I'll just let him handle it. And I've heard horror stories of very successful women not running their own books or not even understanding the process of these things. Like she was I'll give an example. One woman was she was a dentist, and she had a few practices. Like she was very, very well off, and her husband was doing her books, and she always let him handle it. She's like, no, he's my husband. Not only did she find out he was cheating on her, he hired the woman he was cheating on her for his own business and was using money from her business to funnel his business and ran her business to the ground. So, you never know what abuse can come from. And she was with him since she was 16. She's like, I've lived my whole life with this man. I've experienced my world with this man, and now this is what's happening. But so taking preventative measures in our own respects and making sure that we're learning our responsibilities and being aware of what's happening in our households, because God forbid, we never know what trials and tribulations we're going to experience, but we need to be able to be competent on our own. So yeah, that's just a little bit about the resources.
Okay, thank you for sharing those really powerful resources. To all those who might be watching, I hope this is just a reminder for you, or just to let you know that help is not out of reach. It's not out of reach. Okay. So at this point, this is a heavy topic. So just to kind of recenter us, we'd like just to take a moment for a quick breathing exercise.
Hi, everyone. My name is Isa, and I am the program coordinator at Melika, We are a safety and anti-violence nonprofit, really working with communities who are most at risk of gender and hate-based violence. And so thank you. I want to thank Kareem and Sadia for that really, really insightful conversation. And I know I learned so much, and I really appreciate all that you brought. And just as Josie said, this was a really, really heavy topic, and we've been in a deep, deep discussion about it. So I just, before transitioning on into talking about bystander intervention and how we can really address this at a community level, I want to lead us through a short breathing exercise just to ground us and give us all and anyone watching, right, a few minutes to reset. So I'm going to lead a short breathing exercise. It's called box breathing, if you've heard of it before. And I encourage everyone to please take a moment if you want to ground yourself, if your feet are somewhere where they can touch the floor, and if you would like to close your eyes, I invite you to do so now. And box breathing is basically where you breathe in for 4 counts, you hold that for 4 counts, and you breathe out for 4 counts, and then you hold that for 4 counts. So essentially, the counts make a little square. And so again, you just breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, and hold for 4. And we'll do that about 2 to 3 times. So we can all, if everyone watching would like to just get comfortable, get situated, and close your eyes, I again invite you, if you feel comfortable, to do so. And I'll start the breathing exercise. So when I say go, you can breathe in. So go, breathe in, 1, 2, 3, 4. Can hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out, 1, 2, 3, 4. And hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's try that again. Breathe in for 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out, 1, 2, 3, 4. And hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. And one last time. Breathe in, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it, 1, 2, 3, 4. And breathe out, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so I hope that has given you a little bit of mental pause. I hope your body feels a little bit more grounded and present in this moment, and that, you know, everything that we're talking about, you're able to process. And, you know, please, if you do need to take care of yourself in this moment, I invite you to do so. Especially because we're going to now transition into talking a little bit about attacking this at a community level, right? And what it means to really be an upstander, even more than just a bystander, because gender-based violence and domestic violence, the types of harm that we're talking about, happen at a community level, right? It's due to the stigmas that we have. It's due to the oppressive systems that we have in place. And so when we at Medica especially view bystander intervention techniques, we're aiming to address and challenge the power dynamics that perpetuate violence and discrimination. So we want to emphasize the importance of collective action and individual responsibility in creating a safer and more equitable society. You know, the Prophet ﷺ said that if it's basically our obligation, right, as Muslims, like if we see oppression, if we see harm, change it with our hand, right? And I'm paraphrasing the hadith, but change it with our hand, right? And if we're not able to, change it with our tongue. And if we're not able to, then we hate it in our hearts, and that is the least of the actions that we can take. And so really the techniques we are talking about today, or we will talk about today, inshallah, is to empower individuals to actively intervene in situations where you either are witnessing harassment, assault, violence, or just plain discrimination, or anything that really perpetuates the idea of what we're talking about, especially as it relates to domestic and family violence. So these techniques encourage us to challenge these oppressive norms and support survivors while promoting a culture that is really based around respect, consent, and equality. It's so important for us to, as someone who is witnessing something or hears about something, or someone comes to you, right, with their story, to really be able to have the techniques to properly and best support them, as well as seeing this on a community level, right, especially in our faith institutions, right? If we're seeing this, like, how do we address that? And I think something that Sadia and Kareem both spoke to very, very beautifully was challenging victim blaming. And so bystander intervention, it involves challenging victim blaming narratives that place the burden of responsibility mostly on the survivors. But by holding people accountable, even if it's just comments that they're making, or any kind of culture that they're promoting that makes domestic violence, gender-based violence, any of these forms of harm more normalized, or more difficult, really, right, for people who are experiencing it to reach out and get that help. These techniques and really challenging that victim blaming is important for shifting the focus from the actions or choices of survivors to the actions and attitudes of people perpetuating harm. And so by taking steps to actually actively intervene, bystanders can challenge the culture that perpetuates this. And they can really interrupt harmful behaviors and language, especially. Our words mean so much, and they really make up a lot of our culture, right? So that harmful behaviors and language reinforce this inequality that we see that contributes to these levels of violence in our communities. So sometimes bystander intervention looks like speaking up when witnessing objectification or harassment or derogatory comments towards individuals, especially, in the context of their gender, race, or any other identities. So interrupting these behaviors signal that these actions, we won't accept them, right? And our communities won't accept them. And that just contributes to create a safer environment for everyone, and especially for our children as they grow up, right? Because as was mentioned, like, this is so important to begin at such a young age. So really, like, we want to emphasize collective action, because it shouldn't only be the focus when we talk about domestic violence or other types of violence on putting the burden on survivors only, of like, this is what you have to do, and this is how you should reach out for support, and this is, what you need to do, because it really is overwhelming. And a lot of the violence that is created in the first place could be mitigated or could be addressed if we all took, as a community, a lot more action in allyship with one another, and really advocate against these oppressive systems, right? So again, this can look very different. The last thing I want to say before getting into the specific techniques that we talk about at Medica is that self-reflection and accountability is so central to not only addressing gender-based violence, but addressing it as an upstander or as a bystander. It involves examining your own biases, privilege, and your complicity in perpetuating gender inequality, right? And working towards this personal growth and change is also what's going to help create the safer environment for everyone. When you hold yourself accountable as a bystander, you can contribute to a more inclusive and equitable and just safer society that knows how to love, right? That knows what a healthy relationship looks like. And so this is hard work. I won't sugarcoat it. It is difficult, and it takes, it's a journey. It takes a lot of courage, really, truly, to not only do the active interventions, but to do the self-reflection and self-accountability needed to even get to that point, right? So the bystander effect is something I really quickly want to touch on as well, if anyone is not familiar with it. So the bystander effect is when there are a group of people watching something that could be offensive, harmful, or they're watching an actual instance, or they're hearing of something that, again, is perpetuating those kinds of acts of violence, or perpetuating a culture in which objectifying people is okay, or, for example, right? So in that moment, especially if something is being witnessed or if something is being seen in our communities, sometimes there's this diffusion of responsibility, right? Where everyone is looking around at each other thinking, who is going to intervene, right? And everyone really thinks that someone else will do it, right? It's not me, someone else, maybe the next person, maybe the next person, or will report the issue or will do something about it, right? Even if it's simply a comment that was made. Sometimes, even if there are a group of people that usually are values aligned and know that this is not something that we can stand behind, we sometimes might look at each other and be like, okay, are you going to be the person to say something? Are you going to be the person to say something? And then we end up not doing anything and letting that go. And then that person is harmed potentially, or we've, lost an opportunity to really create, again, this safe environment. So now I would definitely want to go into the 4 Ds of bystander intervention. It's a quick way for us to remember and a quick framework for us to understand, like, how do you intervene, right? And what do these things look like? So these, we're going to talk about them, but they are a range of options, right? So it's not step by step necessarily. They're just very different techniques. And again, like reflecting on yourself and also your privilege, right, in a certain situation is really important. Your relationship to the person that you are standing up against or standing in for or standing up for is really important in which one you might choose to use. And so, we want to offer a little bit of flexibility and also acknowledge that these different strategies may be more effective depending on the circumstances, depending on who you are and what the exact situation calls for. The first D of bystander intervention is called direct. And so with direct, this is encouraging direct intervention by addressing the situation head on. So this is when you're really directly engaging with the individuals involved. And so you want to probably express disapproval or concern about either behavior or comments that are made, right? This can include speaking up or confronting the harasser or offering support to the target. This is really the most confrontational form of addressing harassment. And so if the aggressor is escalated, or this is something where you're, depending on the power relationship, right? Like if you are someone who is seeing this and there's a power imbalance either between the people that are being, maybe the person that is being aggressed or harassed or whatever it might be, enacted violence upon, and the person that is perpetuating the harm, or if there's a power imbalance between you and the aggressor, right? So you might have to consider, right, the potential of violence then being directed towards you if you do choose to use direct intervention. Just want to put that disclaimer 100% out there. But this is really the most direct and can be one of the most effective forms. And it can even look as something as simple as maybe you are with friends, right? And you notice that, maybe someone is making jokes or maybe making comments that are clearly very offensive and that are very, they're kind of making light of the violence that maybe someone else is experiencing, or in general, maybe, if these are jokes that are objectifying people in a way that make gender-based violence and domestic violence something that's, kind of to be made fun of, right? And this could be you directly calling out what just happened, right? Just calling out the joke, calling out the person who made that, confronting them, but not in a aggressive way or not in a way in which you are condemning them, right? But just letting them know, like, it is important for us to say, right, like, this is not okay. And also explaining why, right? Just refusing to let certain behaviors continue, right? Or refusing to let accountability go completely untouched, right? Like that's really important. So again, this, depending on the situation, might not be as effective, but if you can and you are able to, then we do encourage people to directly intervene. I want to move on to the second D, which is distract. And so with distract, is exactly what it sounds like. You're using distractions to de-escalate a potentially harmful situation. So this technique could involve diverting the attention of the individuals involved, or creating a diversion to diffuse the tension. So essentially with this, you're trying to redirect the focus of what's going on, right? And you're trying to create a window of opportunity for the person that is experiencing this harm to either remove themselves from the situation or kind of get to a place where they're feeling much more safe, right? So trying to either, if this is something that's physically happening, right, remove the victim from the aggressor by only addressing the victim, right? This is not necessarily that direct intervention. This is more of you're creating a window of opportunity. And so one thing that this could possibly look like is if, for example, you and your friends are on the train, you and your family on the train, and you overhear someone catcalling and making, comments to a young girl sitting alone. While you might want to correct and stand up to the aggressor in that moment, right? Because this is something that is directly addressed or affecting a single young girl, but at the same time, you might feel too threatened to address the aggressor directly, but you want to support the victim. One thing that you could possibly do, right, is to use this distract method. So you walk up to the victim directly and say, hey, I thought I saw you, insert fake name here. All of us are sitting over there. Do you want to come with us, right? This can also happen, like if you notice, for example, maybe there's a family that's maybe at the masjid or at a space that and one of the spouses in that relationship are very clearly aggressive, yelling at the other. You see things might start to get a little physical or look like they're about to get physical, right? Just kind of causing a little bit of distraction. So maybe, you ask the person, or maybe you ask the imam to make an announcement, right, on the mic, or maybe you are going up to them and asking hey, do you know what time Maghrib is, right? Any sort of distraction that you can cause. And again, if this is something like spilling your drink or anything that really gives the person that's experiencing that harm some space and time to separate themselves, is a strategy that could be helpful. I want to move on to the next set. So there's delegate. This involves delegating the responsibility of intervention to maybe someone who might be better equipped to handle the situation, or intervening in groups by engaging others. So this can look kind of a little bit different depending on the situation. So for example, when we talked about power imbalances, right, and we know that domestic violence can happen in families, and sometimes you might be a young person, right, seeing this happen between two adults in your family. And you don't feel like you have that power in that moment to either directly involve yourself or to distract, right? That doesn't make sense for you in that moment. Maybe this means reaching out and letting somebody know who you trust, who has who's on that equal power level. So another trusted adult, for example, and asking for support in that way. This could also look like, if again, maybe going back to a more public situation, if you're seeing something happening in public that kind of indicates that someone is unsafe, intervening with a group of people. So you don't even have to know them, right? You can be people who also are noticing that something is off about this, something is wrong. And everyone, again, has that bystander effect going on of someone should do something about this, but we don't know who. Sometimes it just takes people being given a task to then they want to help, right? They just don't know what to do. So being the person to delegate, be okay, hey, I am going to directly intervene. Can you please get somebody who can help, maybe alert someone who could, report this, or whatever the situation might be. Hey, can you come up and we'll both distract the victim, or we'll distract the aggressor in this situation, anything like that, right? So it can look just like ensuring a timely and appropriate response by involving the people around you. And again, you don't even have to know them necessarily. These can be people that are in your community or even in public, right? just kind of going and being taking the initiative to be the leader in that situation can make all the difference. And then the last D that I want to talk about today is delay. I think we can recognize that immediate intervention may not always be feasible, it might not always be safe. So in such cases, I really hope that folks do not think that there's nothing that you could do, right? We really want to emphasize, like, we can all do something. If you are an upstander or a bystander, but if those techniques don't work for you, or, sometimes, again, it can be personally triggering, especially if you have a history of this in your own self or in your own family. It can be very difficult to stand up for someone else, but we can still all be the person that, we wished was there for us. It might just look something more like delay. In this case, the focus is on delaying intervention until a safer opportunity arises. So, this might be keeping an eye on the situation, monitoring what's going on, and then taking action like when it's appropriate or when additional support is available. So this can even just look like what the panel had really talked about, being that listening ear for someone. If someone is coming to you with the problem or situation, or you witness something, whether it's in your family, in your community, just going up and offering your listening ear or your shoulder, right, as someone who is willing to be there for this person that experienced the harm, that is willing to listen without judgment. Like, it can really make all the difference. Like, making people feel like they are not alone can be such a great form of intervention and help, especially if you're not able to do something right when it happens, right? So again, just being that person who is not victim blaming, who's not judging, who's not challenging them on kind of what they're experiencing when they're in the midst of harm. It really can look like just checking in on them, right? Just checking in, or again, delaying maybe that direct or otherwise types of interactions that are a little bit more that need maybe more support until there's a few more people around, or until someone who, hey, I know I have a family member, or I know someone in my workplace is designated for this kind of thing. How can I bring something to them with always keeping the victim and their privacy and their wishes and their boundaries like at the forefront, right? So not taking action on behalf of someone. This is really like keeping their wishes like at the forefront. And so there's one more as well. It would be document, but really, like, I want to talk about what kind of goes wrong when it comes to documenting. Sometimes, again, like, the biggest issue that I think people face is that they want to use documentation without actually like doing something in the moment, or doing something supportive for the person experiencing harm. And so this might look like, documenting an instance and then immediately, like, especially if it's like something that's more public, right? Or putting someone's information out there without their consent, putting someone's maybe a video or audio recording of something that happened without their consent. Again, we really want to emphasize, like, if you are documenting anything, please do understand the risks of having that information with yourself and not with the victim. Sometimes that might be what they request or might be what's helpful, but also understanding that this is for them and not for, the public to see, or for it to be anything to be done with if that's not what they request. And yeah, so really with bystander intervention, it's really important to just, again, understand that this is something that is really within our deen. There is something that you can do to support others who are going through different types of domestic violence, family violence. And like, if we really pay attention to the culture that we are creating, and if we are that one person, especially in New York, I feel like a lot of times people do have the tendency to turn that blind eye, especially if things are happening in public. But if things are happening in public or in private, in our communities, right, it is important for us to address it. Again, address it with, with our hands, with our tongues, and at the very least with our hearts. So thank you so much. I'll pass it back to Josie.
Thank you, Sister Isa, for grounding us in mindfulness and community action. As we come to a close with today's discussion, let's just revisit. It might be helpful of some of the key reminders from our discussion today. One, domestic violence in Muslim immigrant and refugee communities. Domestic violence is a real issue that impacts both men and women in our Muslim communities. It can manifest in physical, emotional, psychological, financial, and spiritual forms. Acknowledging this diversity in experience is crucial to providing meaningful support. Next topic, creating safe, non-judgmental spaces. We definitely touched on that. When survivors share their stories or proof, our role is to listen with compassion, empathy, and validation, not judgment. Healing begins in environments that honor dignity and confidentiality. Third point, understanding the journey. Leaving an abusive situation often takes time, planning, and, as we've heard, multiple attempts. Each survivor's process is unique and deserves patience and continued support. Fourth takeaway, cultural competent resources. Faith-sensitive and culturally aware organizations like Pillars of Peace and ASIA House exist across the U.S. Even if you live in another state, you can request culturally competent support when reaching out to hotlines or other local agencies. Fifth, the 4 Ds of bystander intervention. We covered direct, and these are just, shortened versions of our, wonderful talk that we just had. Speak up or check in safely with the person who's in danger. Distract, interrupt the situation to diffuse tension. Delegate, seek help from someone in authority or a trusted third party. Delay, follow up later to offer support or resources, and document was also added on at the end. So our responsibility. The Prophet said, whoever among you, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whoever among you sees a wrong, let him change it with his hand. If he cannot, then with his tongue. And if he cannot, then hate it in his heart. So this hadith, it's just a reminder that faith calls us to act against injustice and to do so with compassion, advocacy, and support for those who are harmed or facing difficulties. So everybody who's listening out there, if you or someone you know is in need of support, please reach out to one of the resources that were shared on the screen. Even one conversation can save a life. So at this point, I'd like to welcome back Janice once again to share final reminders. Close this out. And again, I just want to have a moment of gratitude to our partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Josie, and thank you all for being here. Alhamdulillah, we've reached the end of today's panel. On behalf of MISSY, I want to sincerely thank all of our panelists, partner organizations, and everyone joining us for this important conversation. Your engagement is vital in breaking the stigma around domestic violence and supporting survivors in our communities. Please remember that the hotlines and resources shared today are available to you, and the full recording of this event, along with the slides and materials, will be accessible after the session. And here are some affirmations we can end with. I am strong. I am whole. I deserve to heal. I am worthy of deep love and support. I am not alone. So now we will close with our final dua. If I don't know if Brother Hamza wants to close, if I'll just read this one here. In the name of Allah, with whose name nothing can harm in the earth or the heavens. He is the all-hearing, all-knowing. Brother Hamza, do you want to? Yeah. you want
Yes, 1 second.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
Jazakallah khairan to everyone for your participation and dedication. Thank you all. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much for having us. Assalamu alaikum.
Again, thank you so much for having us.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Assalamualaikum. Guys, we're awesome.